volume is Should we begin?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another session of CNI seminar series hosted by ECA and RBCCPS. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Professor Ness Shroff, and he will be speaking on PhD research, elements of excellence. Professor Shroff received his PhD degree from Columbia University in Hawaii in 1994 and joined Purdue University immediately thereafter as an assistant professor. At Purdue, he became professor of the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering and director of CWSA in 2004, a university-wide center on wireless systems and applications. In July 2007, he joined the ECE and CAC departments at the Ohio State University, where he holds the Ohio Eminent Scholar Chaired Professorship of Networking and Communications. From 2009 to 12, he also served as a guest chaired professor of wireless communications at Tsinghua University, Beijing, China. And from 2012 to 16, an honorary guest professor at Shanghai Jiaotong University. He currently holds a visiting position at the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. His research focuses on fundamental problems in machine learning, network optimization, stochastic control, and algorithmic design. His work contributes to the design, control, performance, pricing, and security of complex systems, such as communication networking, computing, storage, and cloud-based systems, social networks, and recommendation systems. He served as the editor-in-chief of the IEEE ACM Transaction on Networking and currently serves as the steering committee chair of ACM Mobi Hawk. He has given several keynote addresses like CompsNet's what happened recently at major conferences and has also organized a number of workshops for the National Science Foundation. And Professor Shroff is a fellow of IEEE and a National Science Foundation Career Awardee. His papers have received numerous awards at top tier venues like IEEE Infocom, YOP, IEEE IW, QoS, and the list goes on. Professor Shroff is on the list of highly cited researchers from Thomson Reuters ISI in 2014 and 15, and in Thomson Reuters' book on the world's most influential scientific minds in 2014. He received the IEEE Infocom Achievement Award for seminal contribution to scheduling and resource allocation in wireless networks in 2014. Before we move on to the talk, we request the online audience to keep your microphones on silent for the duration of the talk. Please unmute and talk if you have any questions. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. If I had known you were going to read my bio, I would have sent you something much shorter. So it's a pleasure to be here and visiting old friends. Today's topic, I thought instead of giving a purely technical talk, I thought maybe I could kind of be professorial in a sense and give you a little bit of my slice of understanding of what a PhD research is all about. Over the years, I've graduated roughly 50 PhD students and 20 or so postdocs. So I've gained a little bit of experience in doing this. And I thought I'd sort of, share my knowledge with you. But I also want to say that this talk will not be very interesting if you just stay as a passive audience and not ask questions. So I strongly recommend that you ask questions, probe, and if you don't agree with something, raise your hand. Please, voice your concerns. That will make the talk much more informative and also enjoyable. All right, with that, let's begin. So here is the outline of my talk. And I have three kind of major topics that I want to cover. The first thing is, what are some of the expectations of a PhD? The second one is about integrity in research. And the final one, which will be the bulk of the talk, will be some strategies for success. So let's begin with the very first one. So what are some of the expectations that you would have in order to complete a PhD? So the first thing to recognize is that a PhD is really unlike a standard course-oriented degree. All right, it is something where you need to do more than simply absorb information. Okay? So, just because you're very, very good at coursework doesn't necessarily mean that you will translate that information into creating a new knowledge. Right? So the more important thing in a PhD, and certainly doing well in classes is important, I don't mean to suggest that it's not, is to really have an impact in either theory or in practice that then future researchers, future engineers can build on. So there is no way around working extremely hard. So I want to kind of be very, very clear that a necessary requirement for a PhD is that you will have to put in the effort. Okay, and there are reasons for that. Making progress is non-trivial, especially in areas which I think are of interest to this audience, machine learning and networking, which are highly competitive. One of the things that I have found in almost every good PhD student that I have encountered is that besides being smart, they are systematic, they love what they do, and they put in the time. So there is no, even if you are very, very smart, if you don't put in the time, you will not produce a good piece of work at the end. And so this is, I think, something which needs to be said. And I have experienced it myself. I've seen many, many incredible, brilliant students, folks that have won the international gold medal in the math Olympiads. They are grandmasters of chess, but they don't seem interested in the work, and in the end, they don't put in the effort that it takes to do a good PhD, and the end product, if they graduate, is not very interesting. So again, hard work is an absolute prerequisite to doing a good PhD. Another very, very important aspect is to adhere to the highest ethical standards. And so let me talk a little bit about that next, which comes about in integrity in research. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, please. Mm-hmm.
Part of the student may not be interested in the research
Mm-hmm.
because he or she picked the wrong field. So I think one question is maybe, I don't know if you're going to cover how we decide what to research.
Yeah, I will cover it. So let's come to that a little bit later. But I think that's that's one of the most important questions as far as the strategies for success. I'll talk about that. Yeah, please go ahead. So there are no quantitative metrics for like for example, with my own PhD students, I don't monitor how hard they work, or I don't kind of say, oh, you have to come in at a certain time, you have to leave at a certain time. I don't care whether they work at home or they work in the lab. It's immaterial for me, but I do expect that they're working hard, right? So it's not a numerical number. Oh, I have to work hard for 6 hours a day, or I have to work hard for 10 hours a day. It's nothing. It's not like that. In fact, oftentimes the PhD work has sort of a very non-linear growth. So what you'll see is nothing happen, and then you'll suddenly get an idea, and then you'll have a jump, and then nothing happen, another idea, and you'll get a jump. But those jumps are not coming naturally. It's because you have put in the effort where nothing has happened, that when your mind is free, allows you to make that jump. That's the point that I want to convey. Right? All right, so let's talk a little bit about integrity in research. And in this setting, I'm going to talk about various aspects of integrity, starting with plagiarism and moving forward. So I think most of you probably understand this definition of plagiarism, which is using an idea that does not belong to you, right? You kind of understand that. Right? The thing to know also is that it is not inappropriate to use somebody's idea as long as you give appropriate attribution. As long as you provide the correct citation, you've given them enough credit, you certainly can use people's idea. What you may not be as familiar with is using text that does not belong to you. All right. So borrowing text from somebody's introduction without quotes or citation is plagiarism. Okay. And it is actually the easiest plagiarism to be detected, by the way. All right. And it's also the easiest plagiarism to get into trouble with. Right. So I want to make sure that everybody understands that this is something that you absolutely cannot do. And if you ask LLM or ChatGPT to write something for you, you better provide the appropriate citation there as well. Another aspect of plagiarism that a lot of people don't know is using software that you don't have license for or you don't own. This is a serious infringement of copyright, and you should not do this. All right. If it's open software, that's fine, but certainly not something which is bootlegged. Right? Students often ask me, and that's why I put this question here, is self-plagiarizing wrong? So if you use a paragraph from your own previous introduction, is that wrong? Yes, it is wrong. Okay? Unless it's a conference to a journal paper where it's explicitly allowed, this is wrong, right? So you have to, again, provide attribution, even if it's your own paragraph that you're using. So bottom line, plagiarism is a very, very serious offense. It goes to the heart of academic integrity. And I suggest you visit this website to understand all of its ramifications. All right. So one of the things that is very, very easy to lose in an academic or an intellectual climate is your reputation. All right. And so it's very important that you don't lose that through making stupid mistakes via plagiarism. So I would again highly recommend that you sort of look into this. It's a warning I give all of my students that this is something that you cannot be trifled with. It's very, very important. All right, now let's talk about proper citations. So it's important to give appropriate citations because not only does it give credit to people where it's due, but it also helps your own work. It helps clarify your own paper. It helps position your own paper with respect to sort of the global contribution. And if you give appropriate citations, it increases the value of your own work. So people understand vis-a-vis the literature where your work properly belongs. Okay? And here, I should say that citations should not be vague. So, a lot of papers say things like, this works, look at a similar problem to 1, 2, 3, but then don't explain why they are similar, right? What you want to do is you want to clarify the appropriate similarities. You want to clarify the appropriate differences between the citations. So, do not bury prior work with greater similarity in a long list of citations. Okay? That itself is tantamount to plagiarism. It may not be something which is explicit, but it is certainly, in my opinion, somewhat unethical. Right? So this is certainly something to be avoided as well. All right. Now, let's talk about a mistake versus a fraud. Okay? All of us, from time to time, make mistakes. Okay? It's always a good thing to check and double check your work. And you certainly don't want to submit a paper that has a wrong result or a wrong proof, but occasionally it happens. Now, when a mistake becomes a fraud is when, after knowingly committing a mistake, you don't correct it. Okay? And this has resulted in huge penalties for people that have committed the mistakes. I mean, I can think of cold fusion, cloning, things of that nature that occurred in various times where people got censured, people lost their jobs because mistakes were not corrected. So it's very, very important that if you make a mistake, even if it has appeared, admit it, write a caveat or whatever on the website, or and make sure that it's out there so that people can understand that your result is actually not correct, and therefore it's something that can be worked upon and improved. And of course, if you can correct it, by all means correct it and publish the correction as well. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about precedents. So let's say you spent 12 months on a problem and you've solved it. And let's say Bob or Mary or your favorite person published a paper with the exact same solution before you submitted your work. What do you do? A, try to publish it because it's independent work. B, give up. C, throw a tantrum and leave the PhD program. Or D, extend, modify, find a new angle and publish. So clearly D should be the right answer, right? Okay, so let me give you a real life example. And the reality is that this happens all the time. I still remember many, many years ago, actually, a good friend of mine, Shrikant from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and I, we were working on a paper with one of my students. We had it all ready and we were about to publish it. We were about to submit it for publication. And just as we were about to submit for publication, we saw a paper by another person who some of you might be familiar with, T.V. Lakshman, who had written almost exactly the same paper. And it had just come out, okay, in a conference that was accepted. Right? Now, the work was on routing in sensor networks, energy efficient routing in sensor networks. Right? So as soon as we saw that, we withdrew our paper and we looked at an extended version of the problem, which included renewable energy, and submitted a new paper citing their work. Right? Didn't affect us in any significant way. We were able to modify it and submit it. So this happens all the time, and nothing to be worried about. Now, if the works appear roughly around the same time, you as an author may not want to enforce this policy on somebody else. That's up to you. Okay, but the point that I'm trying to make is that precedence is something to be aware of, and it is something that has to be respected. All right. Reporting of results. So results should be reported accurately. I am extremely friendly with my PhD students. We have a very good working relationship. We are friends for life after they graduate. But I can tell you that if I ever found out that they fudged the data, they would not be in my program at all. They would be immediately fired. All right. This is an extremely serious offense. So sloppy simulations, experiments are unacceptable, and certainly, incorrectly reporting data is a very, very serious offense, which will cause not only you to lose your credibility, but you will impact your advisors' credibility as well. So this is something that you absolutely have to avoid. Present the entire picture when you're when you're reporting results. If there are scenarios where your solution performs poorly or does not perform as well as the state of the art, don't try to hide it. Okay. If you don't try to hide it, you will actually provide much more credibility to the conclusion that you have in the scenarios in which your work actually does better. And in fact, this type of an analysis helps you to emphasize the scenarios of strength, right? So by this, I don't necessarily mean that you want to sort of, downplay the importance of your work. In fact, if there are scenarios that are important in which your solutions do better, you should highlight that. You are, after all, the salesperson of your work. Okay. Now let's talk about strategies for success, and I'll get to the question that was raised earlier. So let's start a little bit with self-examination. So the first question you should ask yourself before you embark on a PhD is why? Are you doing this PhD for the right reasons, right? So I've had very smart students who have come to me after a while and told me that one of the reasons why they want to do this PhD is because their parents want them to do the PhD, but they're not really that interested. Okay? Or a PhD will find them a good or well-paying job. It's true, but there are other ways of making a lot of money, maybe even more so than a PhD. Okay? So these are not, in my opinion at least, good reasons for doing PhD. Ask yourself, do you enjoy solving problems? Do you enjoy solving puzzles, right? Because much of what you're doing in a PhD is working out intricate problems, intricate puzzles. Are you tenacious? Is like, are you someone who likes to not give up? Like when you kind of, if you cannot solve something, it gnaws at you. You want to figure it out. You want to figure things out, right? This is really, really important because a PhD is a long-term commitment, and you really need to have a thick skin. You really need to have a tenacity that allows you to ride the few highs that come, which will be very high, but there may be lots of lows as well. And so if you answered no to any of the above questions, I'm sorry, I might be dissuading some of you. I think a PhD is probably not the right vocation for you. All right, now let's talk about advisor. So choosing an advisor is an extremely, extremely important aspect of a PhD. Right? You want to figure out which advisor fits your own style, right? Do you want somebody who's very hands-on? You want somebody who's hands-off? Are you more interested in systems, type of work where you kind of want to get your hands dirty and feel like you want to be an experimentalist? That's what really you're passionate about. Or do you prefer to be more of a theorist where you want to kind of, solve deep foundational problems, right? It's totally, you are the person that knows yourself the best, right? So figure out what you want to do. Then figure out whether you want to work with a junior person or a senior person. There are, good reasons to do both. All right, a junior person may be able to give you more time, a senior person may have more experience. There are pros and cons there. My own opinion, when I recruit students, is I tell them, have candid discussions with my own past students. And I strongly recommend you do, with whichever advisor you pick, talk to their students, especially talk to their past students, because those are the ones that are no longer in the lab. They'll be able to tell you what the advisor is really like. Right? You definitely want an advisor, in my opinion, who treats you with respect. If you get the feeling that there's an advisor who doesn't treat you with respect, run. That's not somebody that you want to hang out with. You also, in my opinion, want to have an advisor. This is a very personal opinion, who allows you to challenge that person. Yeah. So it's basically, an advisor should be looking out for the truth, not looking to make a particular point. Right. So that's kind of an important thing to think about. And again, these are things that you will uncover when you have candid discussions with that person's past students. Give your advisor a great deal of confidence in you. If they suggest a problem or a solution, think deeply about it. My best students have always been those where if I kind of give them a high-level idea, I say, okay, this is a solution that I think will work. They don't come back the next week or in 2 weeks saying, hey, we tried your approach, it didn't work. Okay, that's not a good enough answer. What you want to do rather is, if your advisor's suggestion doesn't work, try a variety of different things to see if if you can make it work. And this is what, I think is part and parcel of the scholarship process of a PhD, right? So do the work at hand, impress with deeds. Trust me, your advisor will immediately know if you've spent 3 hours before the meeting trying to, do the problem that he gave you or she gave you a week ago, all right, in the last 3 hours, and then you kind of come up and present something which is half-baked. They will know. Right? That's really the wrong approach. Instead, I would suggest cancel the meeting and have the meeting the following week. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, I mean, so basically, how do you know you're thinking deeply? It's clearly a subjective question. But what I mean by that is, if you can understand, for example, if you're reading a paper, right? If you can understand every aspect of that paper, all right, it means that you are able to follow that paper well, right? Now, what you want to do is, if that paper is very, very related, let's say, to your work, and if it's, let's say, a mathematical paper, then you should be able to reproduce all of the proofs on your own, right? That is a part of thinking deeply about it, right? Then you want to think about, okay, this paper has solved X, Y, and Z, and they've made assumptions A, B, C, right? What if assumption A, for example, were not true? Can I solve that problem? Is this something that I can do? So this is what I mean by think about the problem deeply. You want to think about all the various facets of a problem. All right. Another thing you want is, you want to try to, you feel free to challenge your advisor, feel free to provide opposing points of view, as long as they are, done in a respectful way, they're done based on facts. I mean, my students are not at all shy to tell me that I'm wrong, and happens more often than I care to admit. Okay, so it's true. And part of this challenging is building trust, right? If you haven't done any work, let the advisor know that you haven't done any work. If you need time off, I tell my students to just ask me, right? Communicate effectively rather than trying to deceive. So this is all the part of the building the trust aspect of it. And the reason for that is that your advisor outside of your spouse and parents and immediate family, perhaps, in my opinion, is probably one of the most important relationships of your life. I certainly have a very good relationship with my advisor, and I have a very good relationship with all of my own PhD students, right? It's not only for things like recommendations and career opportunities, which you'd be surprised at various different times in your life, you'll find the need to go back to your advisor for. But it's not only that, but there is a long-term friendship, a long-term intellectual connection that you should have with this person. Yeah. All right, now let's talk about strategies for success. So the first one is preparation. Now, this may be a little bit counterintuitive, but my own personal, this is a very personal opinion, okay, is that PhD students should not limit the number of courses they take. They should take a large variety of classes. Because I personally, this is again a very personal opinion, is that a PhD student is not meant to be merely a technician, not somebody that can only solve very specific problems. But I feel like if I give somebody a PhD, it means that they have achieved a certain scholar status, right? Which means that they know things that are beyond only their limited area of research. And this will help you in life. If you go into industry, it'll help you have tools in order to solve a set of diverse problems that you may not have solved during your PhD. If you go into academia, it'll help you think more broadly about what types of problems to pick yourself and sort of discuss with your students. The other reason is that classes in general have been optimized by somebody else who's done all the hard work, okay, to make them efficient tools of learning. Right? So make the most of it. Right? My own students, for example, take several advanced classes from the math department. In fact, almost all of them can take the qualifying exam in math. I'm not suggesting that's what you do, but I'm just saying that, it's not a waste of time. Taking classes is an important part of your education. Don't just take the minimum and be satisfied with it. I personally found myself, when I was doing a PhD, it kept me regular. So even after I finished all my required classes, I would always take one, I would continue to take one class a semester, okay, because it sort of helped me kind of, get grounded. And personally, it's a great way to learn, very, very efficiently. Now, I'm going to tell you something that sounds almost contradictory, but it's actually not. In addition to taking classes, of course, you should be able to self-learn. Right? You should be able to pick up any book and paper and work through it. This is one of the reasons why we don't give 2 PhDs. Right? In the US, as a rule, most universities will not award 2 PhDs. And the reason for that is that they feel that a PhD is really more about a mindset rather than a curriculum. Right? So you should be able to, by the end of it, you should be able to self-learn. And so this is a very, very important habit that you should pick up early and often. Okay. My own graduate students, for example, we have taught themselves, large deviations, extreme value theory, stochastic control, now are experts in those themselves. Many of them have gone into academia and created new courses in those areas themselves when there were no courses offered. Part of your preparation is to read voraciously. Okay? Read your technical journals and conferences. But in addition to that, I also find, places where ideas can come from are like magazines, tutorials, things like Scientific American, Nature. These are all kind of, broad pieces of works, which might give you some ideas. Oftentimes, these days I get ideas, especially when learning in artificial intelligence, I get ideas when I'm not even reading technical work, right? I'm reading some kind of a magazine, which is very high level, something, say, in the medical field, and says, oh, I can apply this, to this problem. So I think, reading is a very, very important part of your preparation. Now let's come to the problem selection. All right. So here I'll be honest, which is that choosing a good problem, a good area to work in, is probably the most difficult part of the research endeavor. Right? Half the battle, in my opinion, is won if you find a good problem. In my own case, in my own experience, for the first 2 years when I was doing my PhD, I was working on a problem that turned out to be not a problem that was suitable for me. And I was working in fault detection in large systems. And then at some point I said, okay, I'm not working on this anymore. I'm switching. And I switched to an entirely new problem. And then in a year and a half, I graduated. I was able to kind of, make very explicit advances because that new problem was something that I truly loved, enjoyed, and was able to make significant contributions to. So play to your strengths and your interests, right? Are you really driven by theory? Are you driven by practice? Do you like working by yourself? Do you like working in big groups? Ask yourself these questions, because sometimes, a PhD could be something that, you basically are solving a theoretical problem by yourself, individually, throughout, or it could be that, you are part of a very interesting system that's being built. And so there, a lot of interdisciplinary work is important. So find what you are passionate about, find what you are likely to remain excited about. And if you do that, that will sustain you for the duration of your PhD. Yeah. Yeah. So here, I think having candid discussions with your advisor is a good idea. So for example, I think at some point, so there are many reasons why you should change problems. One reason could be that the problem that you have selected is just extremely hard. Okay, it's a problem that perhaps, you chose, it seems interesting, but it's a dead end. Okay, and after maybe, whatever is a suitable time that you worked on it, a year and a half, 2 years, you're not able to make much progress on it. And your advisor, if you have an open communication with your advisor, they should be able to guide you through that part. Okay. And you should be able to, like, for example, in my own case, I just wrote a preliminary proposal and I submitted it to my advisor. And I said, hey, I want to work on this. Here are the problems that I'm thinking of doing. And he thought that was very cool. And he said, yeah, fine. So, different people have different strategies of doing it. I myself have counseled my students and told them, look, I think we are not making much headway here. We should move to something else. And oftentimes that's worked. There have been times, I'll be honest, where the student has stuck to it. And I've seen both outcomes, where students have stuck to it and then they've produced the result, and student has stuck to it and, in fact, not produced anything. So, both are possibilities. But at some point, you feel like if you're not going anywhere, then you probably want to change. But I think a bigger than not going anywhere, if you really feel like the problem no longer excites you, you're not interested in it, then I think you should switch. Okay, that's, I think, much more of a direct tell. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Mhm. So what does it mean to be interested in give me an example when you're interested in a field, but you're not able to get a problem statement. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm. Mm. Yeah. So great question. So I think the question was, let's say if I'm interested in a field, I'm repeating the question for the audience, that I'm interested in robotics, but when I go through a series of questions, I mean, when I go through some of the papers on robotics, I can't find something that I'm very excited about, right? So that could mean one of two things. Okay, one is that you were excited about the idea of robotics because that seems at a 10,000-foot level a rather cool thing to do, but once you got into the nitty-gritty details, it really lost its appeal because you kind of felt like those problems were not cool enough or were not interesting enough for you. And that could be one. It could also be that you have just not successfully identified or spend enough time defining the right problem, for what you want to do. So here again, why do you have an advisor? You have an advisor so that you can discuss these kinds of issues with them, right? So you want to sort of, go to him or her and ask them, is there, like here is a definition. Is this a cool enough, like a problem, or should I modify it? And they should be able to give you some advice on how to modify that problem. But it could very well be that you really are not that interested in robotics. It's just the thought of it, that because you didn't have enough knowledge, you got interested. It's like when everybody is little, right? They love the idea of space and building rockets and things like that. But when you actually learn about the physics of building a rocket and all of the problems that it takes to build a rocket, perhaps you realize that's not really for you. So the same thing could be in robotics.
Hello.
So here are some, in my opinion, salient features of good problems, right? So you want your problem to have an impact. It should not be sort of an incremental thing. After all, you're spending several years in pursuit of this degree, this profession. So you want to kind of figure out whether this problem, really fills an important deficiency or charts a new direction. So don't, just solve a problem because you can publish a paper. That's not a good enough reason. Think, yeah. Yeah, so the question is, how do you convince the society that what you find is a high enough, deficiency is indeed one, right? Yeah. So the first question that so the way you want to think about it is that, I always say that the problem is the most important, right? So for example, if this deficiency is real, then it should be very apparent that this deficiency is real. So for example, if all of the papers in a particular field have made an assumption and relaxing that assumption is somehow very important in practice, then that deficiency is very real, right? And then you can certainly kind of, try to conquer that deficiency. On the other hand, if all of them have made an assumption, and it's a very mild technical assumption, I wouldn't waste 4 years of a PhD relaxing some very mild technical assumption that's going to give you some, you might have to do very deep technical work in order to solve that, but it's going to give you very marginal insight. All right. So first thing you should ask yourself is that if I relax this assumption, who cares? Right? Is this something which is valuable? Is this something that I can first convince myself that, by relaxing this or by filling this deficiency, I'm making an advancement on the research problem. Right? Another thing is, think of the long-term potential. What is the future of this area? Will the solution lead to other interesting questions? I will be honest. This bullet was more written for assistant professors and less for PhD students, but nonetheless, I think it applies. Right? And I personally find that being first in an area actually allows you to make it a lot easier to have impact. Okay, because you don't necessarily need to work that hard in order to have a very cool kind of result, because you were the first in that area. So several such examples, geographic routing, for example. When I look back at that paper, it seems like a very trivial thing, but because they were the first in that area, it had a significant impact. All right. At the same time, it is not unusual for important problems to be challenging. And so no matter how smart you are, the problem may take you time to solve. But if you are persistent, I think you can make an impact even in crowded areas. For example, think of coding theory, right? Turbo codes galvanized an entire area. Right? It can happen. And this is my sort of little bit of feedback to advisors, is give students the time it takes to struggle through a really difficult problem. This is very, very important. I'll give you a little bit of an example from my own life. When I was an assistant professor, I had this brilliant Korean student, Do Young-un, who's now a professor at NC State and well regarded in his own right. And I had given him a problem, which was a very difficult problem. It was about a chicken and an egg type of a problem where it was a measurement and analytic solution where I had this intuition from stochastic analysis that I won't get into the details of the problem, but that chicken and egg cycle could be broken. That was sort of the high level intuition. I thought it was a very cool problem. And I just had this rough intuition, not anything I was confident about, but something that I thought was worthwhile looking at. And this kid was, did my mic go away? Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. And this kid was very, very motivated, very smart. And he worked very hard. I could tell he'd worked very hard on this problem. He came to me after a week, all frazzled, and he said, "Professor, I'm sorry to tell you, but there is no solution to this problem." Okay. And he said, "This is why." And he came up with this very clever reason why there was no solution to this problem and why this chicken and an egg cycle could not be broken. Very thoughtful, very clever, except it was wrong. Okay, so I found this one little mistake in his argument. I said, okay, this is why. I'm not saying that there is a solution, but I'm just telling you that your logic is wrong. So he went away feeling a little better. Next week came back with another similar explanation, told me, I'm sure it can't be worked out. Because of this reason, again, it was wrong. And this went on, and I'm not exaggerating, it went on for over a year. Every week he thought he found a reason for right. Yeah. He found a reason why the problem could not be solved. And then finally, I think he was so fed up of me telling him each time that his argument was wrong, that he solved the problem. That was a beautiful result. All right. Now, even if he didn't solve the problem, from my point of view, I completely was fascinated by the fact that somebody could put in so much thought and come up with such beautiful constructions, even if they turned out to be wrong. All right. So it wasn't like I felt like this kid wasn't doing work. I knew he was working very hard. And so I didn't want to sort of stop him from pursuing the problem. Right? So I think this is what I mean by basically, being persistent, putting in your effort, thinking deeply about the problem, even if it turns out in the end that, you're not able to solve it. All right. Another strategy in finding good problems is having a good understanding of the literature, right? So this is really important in the definition of a problem. And there, ask your advisor for help in finding the right, papers to look at. The advisor can kind of tell you, read papers by so-and-so, not so-and-so, etc. Right? The right problem may find a unique angle or direction that's missing in existing works. I mean, for example, recently, I'm very, very, proud of working out a reinforcement learning solution that had hard constraints, because hard constraints are part of many realities of complex systems, including networking systems. And this is something which was not solved before. Okay, most of the works either looked at reinforcement learning with no constraints or at most average constraints. So hard constraints, we know, is critically important in many settings. So you want to look at that. Now, I sort of thought a little bit before I put this bullet, because I'm not entirely sure that this is helpful advice, but I have myself sometimes found it helpful to think of two problems at a time intermittently, especially if you get stuck on one. It allows you to sort of, turn the page and look at something else, and maybe something happens in the background that allows you to solve the first problem. So it does, at least for me, it does help me to get a fresh perspective. I do feel that as a student, though, you don't want to keep juggling between problems. We want to kind of, keep at the problem. So I would say, probably you don't want to do this too much, but occasionally it's not a bad idea to think of something fresh, just to get your mind out of something that you're completely stuck on. And of course, a good problem can, will, and should get refined itself once a solution is proposed. Right? So once you kind of have an idea of what to do, then you can go back and relax the assumptions that you've made. Some of the trivialities can be removed, etc. So this is all part of finding a good problem. I will say one more thing about problem selection, and this is related to your thesis. In my opinion, again, this is an opinion, a PhD should not be a union of loosely attached problems. Okay? A PhD should have a theme. There should be an overall vision. And you should be ready to articulate that vision, by some mature time in your PhD, right? I mean, after you've done a few works, you should be able to figure out, okay, this is where I want to go. This is the theme of the PhD. Okay. All right. We talked about problems. Let's talk a little bit about solutions. So again, ask your advisor for examples of high quality papers in a field. Okay, I think your advisor hopefully will have enough experience that they can tell you, look for papers from so and so, etc. So that kind of, limits a little bit of your state space. At the same time, do exploration as well, right? Because we all know from a learning point of view that there might be some gems out there from people who are not known to either you or your advisor that might have some really good papers. Read strategically, but it's important that you don't become a clone of anyone. Okay, and always remember that there are no gods in academia. Okay? Oftentimes, I still remember I was at Purdue, and I was so annoyed with a faculty member who told a student, what makes you believe that you can solve this problem when Ward Witt could not? Okay, Ward Witt was this eminent queuing theorist who was not able to solve a problem. And I'm like, that's total nonsense, right? You should not be afraid to solve a problem just because some famous person has not been able to solve it. There are no gods in academia. All right. Now, my own strategy for developing a solution is to start with a very simple toy. Okay, very simplified problem. One where once you've identified the problem, now it's better to ignore the literature. Okay, now try to figure things out yourself. Okay. Understand this toy completely. Understand every aspect of the toy. Okay, and then incrementally add complexity to it. Try to solve it. Use simulations if you need to improve your understanding. Do not be, again, satisfied with a superficial result. Push the problem as far as you can, right? If you've solved the optimal, if you found the optimal solution, ask yourself, is this implementable? Is this something that, I can push further? Can I make it simpler? Those kinds of things. Search for elegance. This is something which I strongly believe in, all right? A complex, unwieldy solution, not only, in my opinion, does not make good academic research, even if you look at industry, and if you look at major breakthroughs that have happened, they always happen with elegant ideas. The Viterbi algorithm, opportunistic scheduling, separation theorem, OFDM, whatever. Right? So if your solution is very complicated, ask yourself, can I easily describe it to somebody who's not an expert? Okay, if the answer is no, work at it a little more. Try to make it more elegant. Try to make it less unwieldy. Search for key insights. Like cross-layer optimization, for those of you who know the literature, one of the big insights was, can they be designed such that they are not very coupled, they're loosely coupled, or in the machine learning literature, in certain cases, you can show that over-parameterization shows this double descent behavior, which is not typically found in statistical learning. Finally, never fall in love with the tool. Okay. Always remember the problem is king. And so if you YouTube Richard Feynman, he has this beautiful saying. He said, I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how clever your solution is. In the end, if it doesn't work, you just have to do it again. Right? You just have to start all over. Right? So the problem is not solved, then you have to solve it. So always remember the problem is key. All right. Let me quickly accelerate a little because I think we're coming close to the end of the time here. Writing. Good writing is extremely underrated, okay? And this is very, very important to your PhD. And here, when I mean by good writing, I'm not talking about grammar and style, although grammar and style are very important, don't get me wrong, but I'm talking about the logical flow of your ideas, okay? It's very, very important that you have a flow of ideas that makes it easy for people to follow what you've written. If you look at data, it suggests that most papers are read by very few people besides the authors and maybe their collaborators, right? So good writing is not something that comes easy. It requires lots of practice. Follow the 10,000-hour rule. Does anybody know what a 10,000-hour rule is? The 10,000-hour rule is that if you really want to be an expert at something, be it golf or basketball or tennis, you have to spend 10,000 hours on it. That's sort of a minimum. So it's
So we understand that.
Yeah, maybe this one. Yeah.
When it comes to, 5 days a week or 5 years.
There you go. Yeah. Some tips in this direction. Let's read lots and lots of books on how to write well. A couple of books that I strongly recommend to my students. One of them is Strunk and White, Elements of Style. So this is actually about grammar. But there's also another beautiful book written by Knuth about mathematical writing. Strongly recommend reading that as well.
Not just about grammar also.
Yeah. Style. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, that's the next bullet, I believe. Right? Write simply and directly, right? Please do. Okay. Thesis after you read it. Yeah. So, what was just mentioned was that, after writing one's PhD thesis and reading Strunk and White, you were forced to rewrite your PhD thesis. That's very interesting to know. But anyway, complicated writing creates confusion. I've noticed that this second bullet now is not very typical of Indian students. When I was in India, by the way, which was many moons ago, this was considered good writing. Okay. It's a terrible idea. Using, bombastic words, using cliches, using flowery language now. What you want to use is you want to write simply, you want to write directly. Reduce notational complexity and limit unnecessary abbreviations. So here, let me give you the same advice that was given to Stephen Hawkins when he wrote The Brief History of Time. So his editor apparently told him that for every equation you put in that book, the sales of your book will reduce by half. All right. So think of abbreviations in a similar way. Every additional abbreviation you put, the readability of your work will basically get cut in half. And by the way, do you know how many equations Brief History of Time had? One, right? Which one? E equals mc squared. Very good. All right. Again, write to explain and not impress. So it's very, very important that you have a good abstract and introduction where you kind of, talk about the why, the what, and the how. All right. Outline, enumerate the key contributions, describe the main idea in an intuitive way at a high level before launching into the details of the system design or the proof. This is a sad thing, but it's a reality. There are many, many excellent technical papers that never get read because the writing is so poor. I won't tell you which authors they are, but I know several. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about intellectual climate. So it's very important that you, even if you, clearly at IISc you already have a wonderful intellectual climate, but you should go out and create your own intellectual climate on top of that. When I was doing a PhD, we had this think tank session that only the students attended every week. And I found that to be the most useful thing we did. We kind of brainstorm ideas, talked about papers without, the prying eyes of advisors. Basically, we could do it ourselves in a very relaxed environment. Yeah, so this is your second bullet there. And I'll just leave this with you, which is strive for the highest level of scholarship and excellence. And this is not only for a PhD, but in whatever you do. And with that, I'll just end with an epilogue from Richard Feynman's lectures on physics, which is that all of the advice that I've given you, use it and tailor it according to your own unique experiences and needs. With that, I'll stop. Thank you. Questions?
Okay, there is an online question.
Mhm.
While working on in collaboration, independent of the thesis, particularly in interdisciplinary research, that is coming with suitable algorithms for solving problems in sciences,
Mhm.
wherein the collaborator comes with suitable science problems and expertise, is it fine for a student coming up with a solution to be just familiar with the problem and not in depth knowledge about science? Governing it.
Oh, I see. I see. Um, I think I think I understand the question. So the question is basically, if you're working in an interdisciplinary field, let's say you're working on machine learning and biology, right? Do you really need to know all that, say, a medical doctor needs to know in order to come up with a predictive cure for cancer, let's say, right? So I would say the answer is a quote unquote no, okay, which is that you don't necessarily need to know as much as the expert in that area knows, because that would be rather impossible to do. But you should have a basic and a working knowledge of what your problem is about. Otherwise, it'll be very hard for you to always rely on someone else to guide you. So I would say it's kind of a maybe, right? It's a no in the sense that you don't need to know all of the, of the other disciplinary aspects of it as much as the experts in that discipline do, but you definitely need a workable knowledge of that. Yeah. And certainly be open to feedback. Always be open to feedback. Yeah. Yes. So this is I kind of put this quote because this is Feynman, I guess, was joking about it. So his Feynman's joke was that when he taught at Caltech, he said, these kids were very bright, but in his opinion, his lectures were not terribly helpful because he felt like either the students didn't understand really what he was saying in depth, or when they did understand, he felt like he was unnecessary. I don't know if I subscribed to it, but I just thought it was kind of cute and fun. But yeah.
Any more questions? Then we'll close the session. Let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
Outside at the coffee hut, please help yourself.